everyone, and welcome back to yet another episode of Ancient History Jewelry Stories. It is the last day of April, and this is, of course, the second of our episodes on the deep dive for this month, Masters of Art Nouveau Jewelry. There is a part 1 where I start with the basics of what the Art Nouveau movement even was, and we discuss 3 important jewelers in the Art Nouveau world. If you haven't listened to that, I highly recommend that you stop what you're doing, pause this episode, and go listen to part 1 first. Hopefully, if you've gotten this far, you have already listened to part 1, or you took my advice, stopped what you were doing, and went and listened to the first episode. If you did so, then you will know that this topic was chosen by you, my lovely listeners. I asked everyone to help me choose the topic for this month's deep dive by voting on a Patreon poll, and there were 2 winners. We had a tie, of course, this topic, the Masters of Art Nouveau Jewelry, and next month's topic, the Art of Faking It, a history of jewelry forgeries. I said it in part 1, but it doesn't hurt to say it again. Thank you to everyone who voted in those polls. It was split into 2 separate polls last time, one for all of my Patreon members, where we weeded out the top 3 contenders, and a second poll for all of my paid Patreon members, where we determined what the topic would be, or topics in this case. If you would also like the opportunity to vote in polls in the future, you can head to patreon.com/ancienthistoryjewelrystories. Generally, the polls are for my paid Patreon members. That is one of the perks of supporting me with your $5 a month, but I do hope to have these split polls again in the future where everyone can at least make their voice heard for the first portion of the poll. For this topic in particular, I did also upload some images to go along with the first episode to help everyone get a better sense of what Art Nouveau jewelry looks like, and I will be uploading even more images to go with this episode, including some exclusive images just for the paid Patreon members. I do get complaints every once in a while from people who wish that there were images to go along with the podcast, and while I unfortunately do not have the time or ability to edit an entire 20 to 30 minute episode with images in video format, I can, at the very least, put up a beautiful gallery of images for you to gawk at while you listen to these episodes. And with all of that information out of the way, let's briefly recap what the Art Nouveau movement was, in case you listened to the first episode 2 weeks ago, which in this current world, with all of the crazy shit going on, might as well have been 2 years ago. The Art Nouveau movement, which was popular between roughly 1890 and 1910, was a style of art, architecture, and applied art, which is design and decoration applied to everyday practical objects, that was mostly inspired by nature and natural forms. It involved a large emphasis on a sense of movement, with the use of forms like the whiplash curve, asymmetry, and a use of modern materials. You start seeing materials like iron, glass, ceramics, and eventually concrete being applied in ways that they would have not been used before. In jewelry specifically, you start seeing an emphasis on materials for their beauty versus their value, with materials like horn and semi-precious stones being used to great effect. It was a reaction to many of the trends and ideals of the 19th century, such as historicism and academic art, and it put a huge emphasis on blurring the lines between fine arts and decorative arts, with the belief that all objects and surroundings should be beautified regardless of whether or not they were considered valuable. In the last episode, I mentioned that there was a German word for this concept that I really loved, Gesamtkunstwerk, which means a total work of art, essentially unified architecture, furnishings, art, and interior design in a common style. Despite being hugely influential and still being incredibly important in modern design, it was mostly over by the start of World War I in 1914. Though the movement lasted only roughly 25 years, it was so influential and inspiring that it has left us with no shortage of incredible artwork and jewelry to look at. In the last episode, we took a look at 3 of the most influential jewelers who I think are maybe a little less known, Lucien Gaillard, Henri Weber, and Gabriel Falgueres, whose name I still don't think I'm pronouncing correctly. And in this episode, we're going to take a look at 2 Art Nouveau jewelers who I think are very well known. I think these 2 are considered the creme de la creme of Art Nouveau jewelers. Two men who had a huge impact on the entire movement as a whole, Rene Lalique and Georges Fouquet. And because I do get tired of talking about mostly men in this space, we are also going to be taking a moment to talk about the most influential woman in the world of Art Nouveau design, the actress Sarah Bernhardt. So let's dive right in with the first of our two artists for today, Rene Lalique. Born in the Champagne region of France in 1860, Rene Lalique was not born into a family of jewelers, unlike some of the other artists we've talked about in the last episode, but he did get his start in the jewelry world fairly young. Starting art classes at the tender age of 12, and continuing on with evening classes at the École des Arts Décoratifs, the School of Decorative Arts, from the ages of 14 to 16, he began an apprenticeship with one of the most prominent jewelers in Paris when he was just 16 years old. Working for the prestigious Parisian jeweler Louis Alcock, Lalique was in a perfect position to learn the ins and outs of fine jewelry design and manufacture. In 1881, by the time he was 21 years old, Rene Lalique was freelancing for various jewelry firms, including Cartier and Boucheron. This means that during this time period, some of the fabled jewelry houses' designs would have been made by Lalique himself. In 1886, he started his own workshop, and by 1890, he had opened his own jewelry store. This is also around the time that he started experimenting with glass. He was not making or designing glass yet at this point, but he was using it in his jewelry. Much like many of his contemporaries, Lalique was very interested in crafting beautiful jewelry using materials that were not considered quote-unquote fine or important. Along with glass, he incorporated pressed horn, ivory, semi-precious stones, pearls, and other materials that weren't necessarily used in high-end jewelry at the time. Much like Louis Comfort Tiffany, who we covered in a previous deep dive topic, he used gems for their appearance, not their value. He was greatly inspired by nature and natural forms, and, very relatably, he surrounded himself with flowers at work. This speaks to me on a deep level, as I'm sitting across from a giant bouquet of lilacs that I bought at the farmer's market this morning. Like some of the jewelers we covered in the last episode, he was very influenced by Japanese art as well. But his three major influences are what he would come to call the three Fs: the female form, flora, and fauna. So of course, in French, it would have been femme, flora, and fauna. Despite having his own shop, he did still design for other stores, most notably Samuel Bing's shop Maison de l'Art Nouveau, which is where we actually get the name Art Nouveau. He started doing this in 1895, and the pieces that he crafted for this shop were hugely influential in defining people's idea of what Art Nouveau jewelry looked like. Of course, as with so many other Art Nouveau jewelers that we've discussed, including Louis Comfort Tiffany, Lalique showed his pieces at the 1900 Universal Exposition in Paris. His pieces received great critical acclaim and went on to inspire dozens, if not hundreds, of other jewelers, although it seems that Lalique did not find imitation to be flattery, but instead was greatly annoyed when anyone made pieces that approximated his own designs. If you are wondering, is this the same Lalique who did all of the pretty glass stuff? Yes. Much like Louis Comfort Tiffany, again, a lot of parallels between these two, Lalique is mostly known for his glass. Quite a few people are not aware that he was such an influential jeweler. In 1907, he collaborated with François Coty to design luxury perfume bottles. He went on to design hundreds of perfume bottles, many of them absolutely iconic and still recognizable today. He specialized in a technique called pâté de verre, which is a glass-making technique where glass is molded to create lifelike forms. But we are not really here to talk about the glass, at least not outside of the context of how Lalique used glass in his own jewelry, which he did. He made some really beautiful jewels using glass as their focal point, as opposed to what would have been most common, semi-precious or precious stones. Unfortunately, I don't know that much about his work in glass, so we're not really going to cover it. That is a different podcast topic for a different podcast host, but we are going to talk about two of Lalique's most important patrons and collaborators. The first is probably the most prolific collector of Lalique's jewelry, the British-Armenian businessman Calouste Gulbenkian. During a friendship spanning nearly 50 years, Gulbenkian purchased almost 175 different items, all made by Rene Lalique. These mostly were made between 1899 and 1927, and all of them now reside in the Calouste Gulbenkian Museum in Portugal. While many men buy jewelry as gifts for the women in their lives, it seems that Gulbenkian was simply an appreciator and true collector of Lalique's art. He was not buying these pieces to give away as gifts, and I don't think he was buying these pieces to wear them himself. He was buying, and sometimes commissioning these pieces, just to collect them, which I think is a very noble pursuit. There are not as many men in the world of jewelry collecting as there are women, and it's nice to see someone appreciating the art form for what it is, an art form, not just consumer goods, not just a frivolous purchase. It's very likely that Lalique was first introduced to Gulbenkian through the second most important person in his professional career, the actress Sarah Bernhardt. As I mentioned at the top of the episode, Bernhardt is probably the most influential woman in the world of Art Nouveau design, and she is the overlap in the Venn diagram between the two jewelers that we're covering in this episode. Known as the Divine Sarah, she was not only an actress and singer, but she was an artist in her own right. This wasn't just a genteel hobby either. She exhibited her sculptures and paintings at the World's Columbia Exposition in Chicago in 1893, showed her work at the Universal Exposition in Paris in 1900, and showed at various Paris salons. And she wasn't just an actress, sculptor, and painter either. She designed dresses, as well as some of her stage costumes. She directed theater companies, and she supervised set and costume design for various theatrical productions. She was not just an it girl, but a true Renaissance woman. So what does she have to do with Rene Lalique, besides being a personal friend and introducing him to one of his largest patrons? Well, for a short while, she was Lalique's muse. She commissioned Lalique to make many pieces, both personal and theatrical, and Lalique, in turn, created multiple miniature busts of Bernhardt, some in silver, some in copper, and others in enamel. As if being the muse of one Art Nouveau luminary wasn't enough, she was also the muse and an incredibly influential figure in the life of yet another very important Art Nouveau artist, Alphonse Mucha. And you may be thinking, what does the Art Nouveau poster guy have to do with jewelry? Well, quite a lot, it turns out. Even if you are not very well versed in Art Nouveau design or art, you have probably seen some of Alphonse Mucha's work. He was one of the most prolific illustrators and artists of the time, and his work went on to influence and inspire hundreds and hundreds of artists in the coming generations. His work was not only popular in the late 1800s and early 1900s, but he had a massive resurgence in popularity in the 1960s and 70s. Focusing mostly on what is considered commercial and advertising design today, his work featured beautiful pastel color palettes, graceful female forms, sinuous curves, and bold outlines. And it all started with the Divine Sarah herself. In 1894, Sarah Bernhardt needed a poster for her production of Gismonda, and she needed it immediately. She contacted the Le Mercier printing shop, where Mucha just happened to be doing a friend a favor and helping him correct proofs for printing. As luck would have it, it was December 26th, and all of the illustrators were off on holiday. So Mucha was turned to in an act of desperation. While he had illustration experience, he did not have experience with poster design, but decided to take on the task anyway. To his surprise, the Divine Sarah loved his work. By January 1st, posters for Gismonda were being put up all over Paris, and they caused an immediate sensation. People had a very visceral reaction to these posters and started stealing them to take them home. They were coveted pieces of art. People were trying to get their hands on these posters through any means necessary, whether it was ripping them off of walls themselves or little acts of bribery. This poster and Mucha's artwork went on to revolutionize poster design, advertising art, and the Art Nouveau style as a whole. Of course, Sarah was so happy with not only the art itself, but the public's reaction that she contracted Mucha to produce more posters, as well as stage and costume designs. This was the start of not only a long and fruitful professional partnership, but also a friendship. This relationship extended beyond just the poster art, the theater costumes, and the set designs, and into jewelry. Because Mucha was not only collaborating with Sarah Bernhardt, but very soon would go on to collaborate with one of the other most influential jewelers in the world of Art Nouveau, Georges Fouquet. Georges Fouquet was born in 1862, and much like some of the other jewelers we discussed in the last episode, he was born into a family of jewelers. His father, Alphonse Fouquet, was a very successful jeweler, working mostly in the Renaissance Revival style. Alphonse was a very important precursor to the Art Nouveau movement. He incorporated many fantastical and mythological elements in his jewelry, such as mermaids and serpents, and he's credited with reintroducing the female form to jewelry, which was considered kind of sacrilegious and scandalous at the time. So we have Georges Fouquet's father to thank for the huge number of women in Art Nouveau jewelry. In 1895, Georges takes over for his father Alphonse and assumes control of the business, and by 1898, he was exhibiting work in the Art Nouveau style. This is contrary to a lot of the other artists we've discussed, who did not really discover their love for Art Nouveau until the 1900 Universal Exposition in Paris. In 1898, or according to some sources, 1899, Fouquet would go on to forge a very important relationship in his professional career, his collaboration with Alphonse Mucha. With Mucha creating many of the designs and Fouquet fabricating beautiful pieces based on those designs, this was the birth of one of the most influential and important collaborations in Art Nouveau jewelry. When Fouquet showed his work at the 1900 Universal Exposition, these pieces were heavily featured, and they drew quite a response from the crowds. Also in the year 1900, Fouquet opened a new jewelry shop, with the entire interior and exterior having been designed by Alphonse Mucha, with the intention being that German concept of Gesamtkunstwerk, a complete work of art, with the design of the shop reflecting the design of the jewelry within it. Today, the interior and exterior of the shop can be found recreated in the Museum Carnavalet in Paris. During this 3-year partnership between Fouquet and Mucha, Sarah Bernhardt still had a very important presence. Some of the most iconic pieces made during this time by the duo were made for Sarah Bernhardt, both for personal and theatrical wear. One of the most recognizable pieces to come out of this collaboration between these three great minds is the most unbelievable serpent bracelet. Made for Bernhardt in 1899, it features a large rearing cobra which wraps multiple times around the wrist and connects to a snake ring. I have seen some sources claim that this was made for Bernhardt's role as Cleopatra, but I don't think that can be true because she was playing Cleopatra on stage in 1890. I have read that while she was playing Cleopatra, she used to keep live snakes in her dressing room and would coil them around her wrists as bracelets, which is potentially where Mucha got the inspiration for this piece. While this particular bracelet was made for Bernhardt as a one-off, I have also read that there were apparently 3 versions of it in the Fouquet archives. It is likely that after seeing this bracelet being sported by Sarah Bernhardt, other wealthy customers wanted to acquire one for themselves. I know that I would have. For many people, this bracelet serves as the gateway drug to Art Nouveau jewelry, the first piece that they see that sets them off on a journey to learn more about this exquisite time period in jewelry art. I know that's definitely true for me. I have been obsessed with this bracelet since the first time I saw it when I was probably 11 or 12 years old. I will be posting pictures of this on the Patreon, but if you decide to look up anything after this episode, please, please, please have it be the Sarah Bernhardt snake bracelet. Though the collaboration between Fouquet and Mucha only lasted about 3 years, this was really a defining moment in the Art Nouveau movement. As influential as Rene Lalique was to his peers, I do believe that the Fouquet-Mucha collaboration was just as influential. And in both cases, these incredibly talented jewelers owed quite a bit of their success to Sarah Bernhardt. Georges Fouquet did go on to continue and make beautiful pieces of jewelry, including some royal tiaras, many of which are, in my opinion, a bit more restrained and far more geometric than the pieces he made in collaboration with Mucha. They are certainly beautiful in their own right, but my heart really belongs to the Fouquet-Mucha collaboration. In much the same way that Georges Fouquet succeeded his father Alphonse with an entirely new and innovative style of design, his son Jean Fouquet went on to design jewelry in the Art Deco style, becoming a much respected jeweler in the 1930s. And that pretty much covers what I could find about Georges Fouquet. Despite being such an influential person in the Art Nouveau movement as a whole and an important jeweler in the history of Art Nouveau jewelry, there really isn't that much information available about him. His Wikipedia page is notably light, and other sources don't offer up much either. I do know that both Alphonse Fouquet and Georges Fouquet were written about in Henri Wever's book about jewelry in 19th century France, the aptly named French Jewelry of the 19th Century. Perhaps I can get my hands on a copy and we can revisit this topic in the future. While these two jewelers, along with Alphonse Mucha, may have been incredibly influential and important in their time, they are by far not the only ones who were working in the Art Nouveau style. As I mentioned, Lalique was very miffed whenever somebody was working in a style that he felt imitated his own, and after the 1900 Universal Exposition, there were quite a few. The one theme that everyone seems to have taken and run with is the butterfly lady, or insect lady, or in Lalique's case, often the flower lady. I mentioned in the last episode that there are just so many butterfly ladies. I've been trying to come up with a working theory to explain why this is the case. I'm sure a good portion of it can just be contributed to aesthetic ideas of the time, but there has to be something deeper. If you have any theories on why the butterfly lady or dragonfly lady or lady as a flower was such a hot subject for jewelry during the late 1800s and early 1900s, please leave me a comment and let me know what you think. I feel like this is a topic that someone can easily write a dissertation about. While we've covered what I consider to be 5 of the masters of Art Nouveau jewelry in the last 2 episodes, they are far from the only ones. There are a lot of other incredible designers and jewelers who were crafting pieces in the Art Nouveau style, some of them working exclusively in this style, and some of them working in many styles, including Art Nouveau. I will be posting this list on the Patreon and probably on my Instagram as well, but if you'd like to bear with me while I butcher a few names, here is a list of other Art Nouveau jewelers that I feel are worth taking the time to look up. Paul Leonard, Philippe Wolfers, Frederick James Partridge, Liberty & Company, Luis Masriera, also known as Masriera y Carreras, Georges Leturc, Eugene Feuillatret, Leopold Gautret, Louis Comfort Tiffany, who we've already covered, and Antoine Bricteau. This is also not an exhaustive list, but at a certain point, you just start coming across pieces that look very similar. So I tried to limit this to people that I thought had their own distinctive style when approaching Art Nouveau. And that wraps up our deep dive into the masters of Art Nouveau jewelry, a stunning, super influential time period in art history that is still sending ripples across the art and design world today. I think I would gladly own a piece by any of these designers, but I would commit some major crimes to own some of the Fouquet-Mucha collaborations. That's a joke, I'm not committing any crimes, but if I do win the lottery, I won't be telling anyone, but you will be seeing me going to the supermarket with my massive opal-inlaid snake bracelet. I hope you enjoyed this, in my opinion, fairly abridged and rather short look into some of the masters of Art Nouveau jewelry. There's so much more out there. If you can decipher what some of those other jewelers' names were based on my horrible pronunciations of French, definitely take the time to look some of them up. I will be posting some of the images from those jewelers on my Patreon, which again, that is patreon.com/ancient history jewelry stories. You can join for free if you want to see pictures. You can pay me $5 a month if you want to have access to voting in polls and some exclusive images. And if you are listening on Spotify or YouTube, leave me a comment. I had to write a note in my notebook to remind myself to ask you all to leave me a comment. I keep forgetting that's a feature that you now have access to on Spotify. I love when people comment on the episodes. It makes me feel like I'm having a real conversation with actual human beings and not just uploading 30 minutes of content for reasons. And I guess I'll be a real podcasting professional and ask you all to like and subscribe. Leave me a rating and a review, but only if it's a good one. Don't leave me a bad review. Go and tell literally anybody else, just not me. If you would like to watch my videos, which you can do on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, you can find me under moonhoney.jewelry on all three of those platforms. If you would like to see the jewelry that I make, my actual work, my real job, you can find that at shopmoonhoney.com. If you would like some merch, including a spicy That Asshole Christopher Columbus bag, you can find that at merch.shopmoonhoney.com. And as I've mentioned probably too many times in this episode, you can find me on Patreon at patreon.com/ancient history jewelry stories. I am eternally grateful to all of you who chose to support me with your $5 a month. That is sustaining my caffeine habit. It's helping me pay for this giant bouquet of lilacs that I bought at the farmer's market. And it means the world to me to know that there are some of you out there who find what I do valuable enough to throw some money at me. That makes it that much easier for me to continue doing this wild little hobby that I've picked up, something that has started to actually take over my life, and I mean that only in the most positive way. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me yell into the void about jewelry and coming along for the ride. And I'll see you all in 2 weeks when we start the next deep dive topic, the art of faking it, a history of jewelry forgery. And of course, for more ancient history jewelry stories.